Hey everyone, welcome to the Edge of It All. I'm your host, Trey Edge, and I look forward to going on this journey with you. Each episode, I'll talk to guests of all walks of life, and I'll ask them the behind-the-scenes truths we all want to know. I'll reach out to newsmakers, celebrities, athletes, and ordinary individuals who were there during some of the biggest events of our time. Together, we will hear the story behind the story. So let's get started. This is the Edge of It All. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of The Edge of It All. Really appreciate everyone joining us today on whatever podcast outlet you have chosen. Don't forget our home studio. Be sure to tune in to UBN Go International Network. You can catch this show and many, many other entertaining shows at UBN Go International Network. Today, we're thrilled. We've got a great interview with really a TV pioneer. He was with BET Black Entertainment Television, an executive producer for them. You know, one of the noted shows, BET Live, with host John Sally, a former NBA player. It was a groundbreaking show, and we're going to get into all of that and the importance of BET and the importance of this man's career and what he has contributed to the entertainment industry. It is my pleasure to welcome Andre Barnwell to the show. Andre, thanks for being with us, my friend.
Hey, thank you too, Trey. And Trey Edge is the edge. And so I'm ready to rock and roll. I'm excited.
I appreciate that. Appreciate you being on. You and I talked a little bit before we got started here, and you were a Philadelphia guy. And what I wanted to take you back to really quick before we get into all of the incredible things you've done and where you are today and what you're doing. Mm-hmm. When you think back to your childhood in Philadelphia, mm-hmm. and this link to what you've done in entertainment and TV and everything else, is there something in your childhood that you think back now mm-hmm. and say, man, that's where all that came from? Maybe there was a moment watching a TV show, whatever it was. Can you think of something in your childhood like that?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me that, Trey, because you know what? I grew up in a town. It's called Yeadon, Pennsylvania. It was right outside of Philadelphia. And actually it's the hometown of the founder of Flag Day, William T. Kerr. So
there you go.
I'm real small city type. But I was fortunate enough that we had our own movie theater, the Yeadon Movie Theater. And so you would go to the movies on Saturdays and the matinees. I remember, now I'm telling my age, but I remember when I first saw the Planet of the Apes, you know, and I just looked at it as entertainment. I didn't make a connection. I mean, I've always loved that experience, you know, to go somewhere and then just, you know, movie, television, it takes you somewhere else. It takes you out of your reality for a couple of minutes, a couple of hours. And it was so fascinating to me. But as a child, I just saw it as entertainment. Yeah. I didn't have any role models that said, okay, no, people actually do this as a business. I just knew the theater operator and then the movie. But I think that seed was planted. And I think just through experience and happened to be in the right place, it started to trigger that, you know, because sometimes you kind of navigate back to something and you'll have no idea. And I think that's when the seed was planted. Unfortunately, it burnt down. One of my bucket lists is actually to rebuild it in my small town.
Oh, wow.
The Yeadon Movie Theater, yes.
Oh, that's incredible. Well, we'll have to keep tabs on that. That's great. Yeah. Isn't that, though, the case with whatever your passion is? What I would ask you, it doesn't matter what it is. You and I are both sports buffs. And sometimes when you're watching a football game, for that 3 hours, you lose yourself. Whatever's kind of going on in your life, you can, in some ways, suspend it. And the beauty of what you've done in TV, in movies, everything, we'll talk about all that. I mean, is that part of it? I mean, you just touched on it a little bit, but it's especially the world we live in today. Right. You know, getting away from things is not a bad idea.
Exactly. and I think bringing the temperature, and that's to me why entertainment is not news, right? So it's like when my father on Sundays, he'd get the newspaper and, you know, at 10 o'clock, you didn't mess with him. I mean, my father was retired military. So, but that was the news time, right? Well, that was serious. Walter Cronkite, that was the serious stuff. That's when we were sent out to play because the parents were watching the news. But then it was entertainment time. They kind of allowed us. That was our way of just being able to dial it down and have an imagination, so that when you're out in the yard with those little sticks and twigs, now you're making them into people, right? Because you couldn't afford to have those extensive games, but you made it work. You played your cops and Indians. Why? Because you was watching on TV. You weren't intended to really kill people, but it was just something for young people. You got to have something for your children to do, or they're going to drive you crazy. And I just think and I'm very hesitant when news and entertainment get too close to each other, because I don't think it should be a merge. I think it's two different times in your day, and for your brain, sometimes it's time to just wind down. And I always tell my friends, like, let it go, man. Just let it go. It's gonna be all right. Go outside, just walk around, man. Just find out where the squirrels are going. Just bring it down, because I don't think as humans we can keep all that in without exploding. And so, yeah, I didn't know it at the time, but I think that's what I was starting to gravitate to, that entertaining side of the spectrum.
I love that, dialing it down. I love that. I'm gonna keep that with me. You move into this business, and I just want to take you to the moment where you would say you got into it. Where was that moment where you got into the entertainment business?
I got into it as a business when I was actually in Washington, D.C., and I was working for Xerox Corporation. I had graduated with a marketing degree, and back in those days, IBM and Xerox were huge places. If you were a marketing major, that's where you went. And so I knew even back then, because you had the finance and accounting people, and I knew I was business oriented. But in the business oriented, marketing was the most creative of those options. So I took into marketing, and then I had a friend who was at Xerox at the time, and he just got a job with BET. BET started in Georgetown, for those who are familiar with Washington, D.C. area. That was their main base. And he said, "Hey, Andre, I'm going over here to this new startup." And just to let people know, cable back then was like laughed at, because the broadcast people laughed at cable because they're like, "What is cable?" They were just, so that was kind of a risky place to go. But in a world of DC, which is a very political town, and remember, I had kind of an inkling for entertainment. I saw that as a way to kind of go into. I had a mentor in that case, since there was someone I went to Howard with, that could kind of like a bigger brother kind of a shade. And that's where I started. And so I didn't go, and this is a funny Trey, I didn't go immediately because I thought staying at Xerox, I didn't think I had anything to give anyone, because I'm just a kid out of college. So I said, well, no, I'm going to stay at Xerox at least a year, because they were known as a good marketing place. So, being naive is probably great. So I stayed at Xerox another year, and then as another opportunity opened up at BT in Georgetown, then I decided to make that move. So that's where it started, in Georgetown, a region of Washington, D.C.
But from going to marketing, and once you got with BET, you wore so many hats.
Right.
Producer, director, production executive. It all exploded for you. But from being the marketing person to this person who, was responsible for content,
right,
in a business like BET, how did you make that leap? Because it doesn't, marketing. Listen, I was a journalism marketing major myself, and there's a thread there that's similar, but it's not necessarily, knowing how to be over creative content. So there was a leap there at some point you had to make.
Yes. Yeah.
How did you do that?
Yeah. Well, the good thing about my marketing degree, it was actually a bachelor's of business administration with a concentration in marketing. So I still understood accounting and finance, those elements, but my core classes, I wanted to, hey man, I want to make the next mixed burger and the new fly. I just thought that was just a fascinating side. So and this is where just, timing, I didn't consciously think of this, but when I was at Xerox, I was in their auditing area where, they're very good on structure. So I was trained there how to follow a copier from ordering it. And I had actually the Navy district. So ordering it to getting it onto a sub. So my skill set was logistics and moving things. And the good thing about going to startup companies, they don't have, they need structure. So the reason why they were very interested in me is I'm coming from a corporate environment that has a lot of structure, that has a lot of, like, I could build systems for them, tracking things, things are all over. And so I actually came into BT as an internal auditor because they looked at my Xerox skills more than my marketing degree. And then when I came in as an auditor, the first day I got there, my new boss said, "Andre, I have a problem. We had to let go of our accounts payable manager, and I know I hired you as an internal auditor." And then she paused, and something in my instinct said, "I need to say yes to this." So I said yes to this. Trey, I had no idea how to do accounts payable. Thank God, and this is why networking is great. When I got the job, I started calling all my friends at Howard who were accounting majors. And I was like, okay, my first day of job, I got this machine. What do I do? And they literally walked me through. And then my boss at the time too said, "Well, Andre, what do you do with your own checking account, your checkbook?" And I said, "I balance it to a T." I said, "My dad was a sergeant major in the Army, so there is no gray area." So she's like, he said, "What this function is just like your personal checkbook." And that was just enough to kind of bring my temperature down. It says, you know what? I need to do this because I had the sense that, when you're in small startups, I just knew that just by studying startups, they're going to grow from the inside first. And then there's going to be a lot of multiple things that you're going to be doing. And that's where those multiple concepts, I ended up becoming their budget director. And as a budget director, I was monitoring all of their shows. So from a distance, I started to see the show structure.
There you go.
How the shows were cost, above the line, the below the line. So I'm kind of getting a back end education with it. And then that's how I started to gravitate into the creative meetings, just because I wanted to understand how the budget worked with them. And you know how creative EPs get, when they see that you're kind of there helping, they kind of want you to stay around. So I started to learn a lot about it without, putting any pressure on them. But my actual big trigger to go from now the finance side to the production side happened when I actually left the company to come to California. I launched a fragrance business, and then I got rehired on the West Coast. They didn't have those budget skills in Burbank, and I left on good terms. So they asked me to come back as a freelancer and monitor two shows. They had a dating show and they had a comedy show. And then I came on to manage those two shows from a budget structure. I didn't know, Trey, at the time, that the corporate people didn't go on site to help because I didn't know. So I started showing up on site to figure out what their needs were when I came back into the office. And then the EPs called their boss in DC and they're like, "No, we want Dre to stay with us because he knows how to translate those financial words to what production," because they were all creative people. So they didn't know the structure. And DC had trust in me because I knew, leaving as a budget director, I knew what they needed. And then I started to know what the production people needed. And so I became like the conduit of that. And that's how it started. My new EP saw in me that I was a producer and I didn't know it.
Yeah.
And he joked about it years ago. He's like, "Andre, I could see it on your face, but you didn't know it because you had no reference." And then when the opportunity came, that's I was on location, and then he brought me on as an additional EP on his comedy show. And that's where now the creative people started to accept me into that family. And then it hit me that that's actually where I'm supposed to be. And then I realized I was a executive producer who was creative, but I had a financial background.
Yeah, you had that business side. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I say, "Oh, that idea is cool," I know that idea is but that's a $500,000 idea, and I know I can deliver it because that's side of my brain, because everything is so big with people. It's like, no, we don't have that kind of money. And so I was able to use both sides of my brain. And that's how those combinations. So when I tell young people, just go for it, stay curious, and you just, you'll be surprised. I mean, I had, coming from the East Coast, I had no concept of coming to California. Most of my friends, they went to Penn State and they were like, California, man, next earthquake, Arizona is going to be the next California. So, it wasn't even in the box, but I was just that curious kid. And I guess, like you say, going back to your upbringing, I was that curious kid that just said, hey, I'll try it as long as it wasn't harmful. I just kind of stayed on that curiosity path. Right?
So it's fair to say that led you to what became your passion.
Yes.
That track. And that's kind of where I want to take you. And I want to go back for just a little bit here with that beginning of BET, Black Entertainment Television, and what that was like. That launched and it was, 80s and 90s, that time. And I remember we did an interview not long ago with Flavor Flav. And we were talking about that time, just that snapshot of time and what things were like. Right. And they were very different than they are today, exactly. Obviously. Whether you want to call it tension or fighting to be heard, maybe more. But I want you to just take us inside that for a minute and what it was like from the inside, the launch of something like BET, and what made you think, you know what, man, this could work.
Right. Yes, you know what? It wasn't even, growing up, I was always built into me for hard work, right? And we were never built to fear anything. We were like, you know what? You can't control what you can't control. All you can control is you, and you give it your best. And I think playing football actually helped too, because playing high school football, you have to have a winner's mentality on that field. Even after 40 minutes, you come off and you lose. But your coaches are like, as long as you put it all out on the field, then let what happens. And so I think I brought those that military discipline from my father, and then that sports discipline of never lose. You just put it out on the field. Sometimes you'll come up with a W. Sometimes you come up with an L. At the end, you shake a hand and you keep moving. So I never really had that fear. When I came to BT, I just knew that what they were presenting was never presented in a cable world before. So,
exactly.
And essentially it started with music. So now these are those music greats that you live with, that now you're able to see a video version of them. And I think the freshness of the music video as a technology was the type of mechanism that people were curious about, and that engagement, started off. And when I saw that reaction to those videos being played and those performances, and there's an audience out there for it, because I was able to, as a budget, I was able to see the viewers. I was able to see where Black people actually were in America in high concentrations, because most people thought, the most populous state in the United States with Black people is Mississippi, and it's still to this day. And there's a Southern swing for, even though I grew up in my mom was from Virginia, my dad was from South Carolina, and they migrated north, but the majority of Black people were still in the South.
Absolutely.
And the music was very specific to what they enjoyed. There was an extreme response to it. It's almost like young people would rock and roll for the first time. If you find, and I knew that from marketing, when you find a target audience and you provide them something that they can't get anywhere else, they're typically going to be very positive and they're going to be very loyal when you deliver that.
What were some of the biggest challenges? Because there had to be some. I mean, this was new. This was different. And you guys were bringing different content to cable TV. So what were the challenges there?
Yeah, to me, the major challenge was advertisers devaluing the Black eyeball. Because in our world, it was like, as a producer, your ratings number is what dictated that you got money, right? So if you got a 1, and you're supposed to get $25,000 a spot. I mean, that's what kept you motivated. But we started to realize that our rating number didn't equate to what the advertiser were willing to pay. So they devalued that black eyeball for that same number that everyone else.
Interesting.
So if MTV got a 0.5 and we got a 0.5, the advertising spot on MTV would be higher than ours. So
fascinating.
So because of that, you had to adjust because your budgets weren't as big, so you didn't have enough as much money. So where the audience wanted you to do a lot of other things, there wasn't enough trade, there wasn't enough money in that pot until you started to get better worth from it. And that from day one was always a struggle, and it forced us to have to be very creative with that. And even to this day, I mean, you still hear that out there when you hear Byron Allen, some other folks. There's still that advertising dollar, because it's not a fair dollar, has always made you have to adjust. And so, but what I did like about leadership, it wasn't, and that's what I liked about it. It wasn't like, okay, well, because of that, we're going to quit. It's like, in spite of that, we're just going to keep moving forward.
Keep going.
You got to keep, it's just like, I know I go back to a lot of football analogies, but it's like, it's halftime and it's 34, you're down by 34 points. I mean, hey man, it's 2 more quarters. You just got to keep
going.
And that's what I liked about it, because number one, the music was connected culturally to how I grew up and the music. So I felt sort of like a double-edged sword that I have to try to find a way to make sure that this art form in the cable world is just as valuable as any other art form, right? So, and that's what the motivation. But yes, to Trey, to your point, yeah, it was getting that the same dollar that someone else got for the same goal. The rules it's like if I run 100 yards, I'm supposed to score a touchdown, not get 3 points.
Absolutely.
So that was the whole thing, and that's why I just saw it as a challenge, to be honest.
How would it be different if you were starting BET in today's culture versus the culture then? A lot of people are going to sit there and go, oh, it'd be so much easier. Everything has its challenges that you were just talking about. But would it be easier today?
No, because what the key to that time, again, is cable as a concept from broadcast was new technology. And so it was right for people to be able to go into it. It was sort of like off the radar. And so nowadays, what a lot of networks are getting in trouble with is they think streaming is the former cable, but it really isn't. And what they did was they thought people were going to SVOD, consumers were going to SVOD their programming, and most consumers are going to AVOD their programming, right? So the advertising spot, all these networks wanted to kind of feel like they're going to just be Showtimes and HBOs. That's where the customer is going to go. And to me, it's going to naturally go back to a few of those high-end streamers, and then advertising, because I just think it's just a part of the American culture. That ad spot with programming, back to the soap opera days, is going to levitate. So no, today it's going to be extreme because they haven't. Well, they're starting to figure that out, because you're seeing how they're trying to scramble to cover those costs that they do with all that streaming. Like, right. So yeah, it would be more challenging now unless there was a new technology like cable was at the time we did it, because your budgets, your numbers aren't as great. We couldn't compete with broadcast. They had huge money to deal with, so we had to come with a different way. So it would be much more challenging. And now too, young people, they got so many more options. There's just
that's the thing.
Yeah. So, and they're those little Gen Zers, man, they're tough.
It's tough to get that attention.
Yeah.
You worked with Bob Johnson. He was the co-founder of BET. And I just wanted to ask you briefly about that. The experience of working with him, a legend in the business, right. What you took out of that experience with him, and maybe behind the scenes, we see the product, we see the end product. We don't see the grunt work.
Exactly.
What were those days like?
Yeah. I'm glad you asked, because I think there was one thing that really I just didn't realize how important that was, is when I was the budget director and eventually getting there, but I was accounts payable manager, we had to, and this is back in the days when you actually printed out checks, right? So I literally had to have every check that was paid out of BET, I had to put it into a satchel, and I had to go up to his office.
Wow.
Bob Johnson signed every check.
Now, was that intimidating at all?
Oh my God. It was so intimidating, because he would look at stuff. Now remember, I have the check, I have the invoice, I have the purchase order, and I have it pinned together, and I have them all separate. But he would look at something. He's like, damn it, I didn't want to buy this. And I'm the only one in front of him. So I know he's not talking to me, but he's the president. I'm like, I'm just trying to and I learned how just not to say anything. I just sat there, and he would he'd look at it. He's like, no, I don't want to pay that. And what I made sure is when he pulled a check out of that satchel, it didn't get back in that satchel. So when he pulled it out, I was like, okay, when I leave his office, that one's not getting paid. But yeah, and his commitment to the company was, you tell me which days I have to be in the office, and I will stay in the office until every check that you put in front of me is signed.
Wow.
And he did that. And that, to me, was the biggest leadership thing I've ever came. And when I went back downstairs, I said, why do you do that? He's like, because I don't care what business that you have, money comes in, money comes out. And if you're in that process, you know what your business is doing. And that was the biggest take, even in my own personal businesses. I have not delegated that authority to anyone, because there's two things that he said you should always have. Sign your checks, and have, no matter where you are in the world, make sure you see your bank statement. Because he's like, I don't care how complicated accrual processes work.
Right.
Money goes into your bank statement and money comes out. So he looks at it today and it's 100,000. He looks at it tomorrow and says 50,000. He's like, hey, where'd that 50,000?
Where'd it go? Yeah.
Yeah. Those two things. And he didn't micromanage the creative process as well, Trey. He hired the people he was a business person. So he hired the people that were supposed to do that. So he didn't kind of he wasn't that owner coach that wanted to coach from the sidelines.
Yeah. Don't get me started on that.
Exactly. And so I admire that about him as well, too, because at the end of the day, he's like, well, I own all of this, so I don't need to prove that. But he let his people that he hired with certain disciplines do what he needed to do. Now he has certain boxes. He put you in certain kind of parameters, but he let you do your job.
Andre Barnwell joining us here on the edge of it all. Appreciate him joining us today. You were executive producer during those times on several shows.
Yeah.
I believe it was Comic View, with DL. You had that one. Had your own sketch comedy show, I believe, The Way We Do It.
Yes.
Ricky Smiley. But what I wanted to take your focus to was that groundbreaking BET Live show with John Sally. We mentioned at the beginning, former NBA player. I saw him play at Georgia Tech college basketball. I was also familiar with, he was just a funny dude.
Right.
People didn't get that about him sometimes, but he just was. But it was such an important show, and you worked with that show, and it was successful and groundbreaking in certain ways. Magic Johnson, one of the biggest stars ever, tried his hand at late night TV, and it did not work.
Exactly.
But this worked. Why did it work? Well,
this and I'm glad you said that, because there's a couple of things that the industry just didn't want to say out loud, but they weren't really confident in professional athletes doing something outside of what they're good at. So they were very reluctant about moving that. And then the Magic thing really didn't help matters.
No,
right?
It did not.
So, and then the other thing with athletes is, and I didn't know this till I really got involved in the directing and dealing with camera people. John Sally's 6'11". And so they were like, Andre, if you put a 6'11" person next to a 5'5" actress and try to get them in the frame of your camera, it's impossible.
It's gonna be tough
because there's just and they were like, that's why when you see a lot of movie stars, the men and the women are around the same height because that key shot is such an important shot. So they really stayed away from that lengthy, and John's 6'11", that really lengthy athlete. And they said when they're sitting down, even with that size, it's an awkward sit in a chair that's really built for someone who maybe top 6'2". And so you got so the visuals on that is challenging. And, they just didn't want to take chances. Now, I knew John had a personality. I remember him on Best Damn Sports Show. So I knew he could do that. And his diction's a New Yorker, so he's got a good gift of gab. So he could overcome the challenge that Magic had because it was a speech impediment. So it wasn't something just made up. I mean, just that's how it was, and that was a challenge in hosting because you can't have that happen. So we decided that we would take a chance and do it because we felt we could work through that. We could shoot things in a way that's a little different, and I'm glad we did it because we wanted to step in and kind of come at it from a different perspective. We wanted to be a late night show, because we can't. Back to your thing about money and competing. So the way that you typically compete, you do something a little bit odd, a little bit something different, where at least people are curious. Where it's like, well, okay, their host is a former player. Let me just look to see what that looks like. And when they tune in, then they might stay because of the other things that you did. We learned that from Comic View, actually, because my first year on Comic View, where I actually became the showrunner, is the year Gary Owen, who's a white comedian, became the host of BT.
Oh, okay.
It made such an uproar. Now, Gary Owen, as far as his type of humor, our audience always loved it. So it wasn't
absolutely. I remember.
Yeah, it wasn't nothing like that. But what happened was a white audience was like, wait a minute, BT's got a white host. They tuned in, and then when they tuned in, they stayed because they enjoyed the entertainment. And so we learned then is if you present a little bit off, you get people curious. And then once they come in and pass something that they enjoy, they might stay around. So we use that same logic with BT Live.
And one of the things I found fascinating about it was a show for a predominantly Black audience.
Yeah.
But you brought in non-Black guests. You just talked about Owen and how, because ultimately you've got to cross over, or you hope to cross over to get a bigger audience. And I just picked one guy out, but an example is Anthony Michael Hall.
Right.
And I believe he played music as well and did that for the first time on that show.
Exactly.
And so, it was a conscious effort. Mm-hmm. Not to just be targeted.
Exactly. Well, a couple of things happened. Well, at the time we were doing BT Live, we were about to. That's when Viacom came and they were going to fix the bias. So my boss at the time said, Andre, we got about 2 years before it actually gets out here to Burbank, right?
Okay.
So he literally kind of gave me the show. He said, you can do whatever you want because it's going to be sold. So I was kind of thinking of like what I would do with this show and just how I moved around. Now, growing up, my high school wasn't all Black. It was a mixed school. I started at the university, which was a majority white school, but then I went to Howard, which was a majority Black school. So, I knew that, I moved in spaces that were a little different. And I just, when I got statistics about viewership, I realized that Black viewers watched more of everything than any other audience. So they weren't just watching Black stuff; they watched everything. So my position was, I want to bring in people that aren't Black, that Black people enjoy.
Absolutely.
You know? And that's how I ran into Lori, because I needed a booker who could understand, and come from that broader experience and bring that type of talent to our viewers. Because I just wanted to give. So Anthony Michael is a perfect example. And when I met with him, he was sort of reluctant in it, and he said, Andre, are you sure your viewers really want to watch me? I said, Anthony, do you think Black people don't know about the Breakfast Club?
He was hilarious, man.
I said, trust me. I said, trust me. They love you. And then I said, well, by the way, I said, what else are you doing? And he's like, well, I'm doing my music. Well, BT, so that's music. Yep. So, but he said, you know what? But the other networks, they really don't like to, if you're an actor, they really don't want to showcase your other stuff. And I was like, Anthony, you want to perform at BT Live? Go for it, man. And he was like, really? I said, yeah, we're not into that. Whatever you're into and you're doing other things, we're not going to be like, oh, well, you're just an actor, so just come athlete. I mean, think about John Sally. He's supposed to be just an athlete. Well, no, he's a host now. So Anthony Michael was the perfect example, because I wanted to kind of share with Hollywood what the mindset was. He was a perfect example of someone who our audience knows and loves, who is not Black, that they enjoy. And I'm like, remember, we're a late night show, and I wanted to give our audience as broad of a spectrum. We even had Coco Lee come on, rest in peace, come on. And she she has a soulful sound. She kind of reminds me of like a Tina Marie with Black people. Because when Black people first heard about Tina Marie, they thought she was Black.
Didn't we all?
Saw her, and then they were like, but by that time, they were like, well, she's a cool white girl. And so I wanted to keep that up, because I wanted to know that there's a bridge there. My best friend in Pennsylvania when I was growing up, the Italian guy, his name was Eugene Barberi. We called him Beanie. Coolest dude on the planet, right? I was like, so to answer your question, I think I got a little selfish where I'm like, these kind of combinations work because I'm a living representative of, there's going to be times where you're going to be with your own, but there's going to be times when you're in the melting pot. And so I wanted to reflect that in an entertainment kind of way, that it was like, well, if you like to hear some cool stuff, it shouldn't matter at some point what they look like, because you're coming in for the cool stuff.
You kind of go independent from there. Mm-hmm. And you did some things. You worked, I believe it was at Warner Brothers with Steve Harvey. Worked on Big Time. Mm-hmm. I believe that's what it was. And now,
yeah.
I mean, look, you can't turn on the TV now without seeing Steve Harvey somewhere. I think he's even got a Judge show now, if I'm not mistaken. Right. Who knew that was coming?
Exactly.
Also, a show on Paramount, which was Dance 360, I believe it was called.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And which may have been before its time, by the way. Right. It was a dance show, and now we've gone through so many different versions of dance shows that have been wildly successful. So my question to you is, what attracts you to a show?
Right. Well, what happened, when I got my sketch comedy show, because then my boss said, okay, Andu, well, what do you personally want to do? I said, well, I want to develop my directing chops at this point, because I wanted to walk away with something that I know what was mine, and I wanted that kind of balance. He started the comedy show. I said, no, I like sketches. So I wanted to create a sketch show. So I was able to create it and direct it and walk away with it. So because I knew going into now, and again, and it's not a knock, but anytime a new company comes in, they're going to want their own people. So I'm like, that's what Viacom should do. So my strategy was an exit strategy. So I knew I now needed to compete in the outside market, and they're just not going to let me walk in at an EP level. It's just not, broadcast, they're just not going to do that, right? So I knew that with my show, I would be able to then produce again, and that's where I was starting to get the little bites where I was a senior producer on Big Time and a senior producer on Dance 360, so that I could start to make that transition and have a couple of credits on my sheet but eventually I still wanted to go independent. But that urban culture, and because I just knew how to do things a little bit more efficiently, because in some, cable, you need to survive. That's what kind of bridged me into doing some of those independent producing gigs.
And what it's done is it's taken you to where we are now, and you're involved in so many things. And I'll let you jump in here quick. I want to make sure we hit everything before we run out of time with you. But for example, Team World, which is a startup streaming network, content to Black South Africans, financial executive producer. I think it's with HBCU Go. Yes. If I said that correct, that's historically Black community university, which people may not. Historically Black colleges. People may not know what that stands for. I do. Very familiar. If you're a football fan and you know who Deion Sanders is and all of that stuff, live football and basketball games there, and even involved in the Fashion Institute. You're involved in so many things, projects now, We Buggin', and we're going to get to your horror movie here in just a second.
That's okay.
But all of those things, it's so varied and so diverse what you're doing, and it's important work. How do you juggle all of those things?
Trey, it's really interesting because they still follow sort of the same format. It's just that their outputs are a little different. Like when they're like, well, how do you do fragrances and then you can do a TV show? Well, fragrance is liquid in a bottle. A TV show is just it's 30 minutes of digital output. So it still starts the same way. It's a blank piece of paper. There's a concept, there's a delivery, and they're both products. So it's just a different types of products that it is. And that's where, like the animated show, well, I did a little clip in my sketch show before I started anime show, but they're all the same. They all work out the kind of like the same way. Now I stay a little bit inside of a lane where it's certain genres that I play into, right? So in the television world, I kind of stay. I started with comedy, stand up, then I went to sketch, and in animation, my animations are humorous. So you're kind of still in the same lane. The only difference is the hard difference, but Jordan Peele summed that up perfectly. I don't know what it is, Trey, about sketch comedy in horror, but they just have a natural. When he said that, I was like, that's the same thing when because you think about going in a film, you got all those genres to go to, but this is so weird. Sketch shows and horror, I just naturally, I said it's horror. Now in my horror though, his horror has more of a social concept to it. I'm very traditional horror. I'm into the monster side. As a kid, I liked monsters. So
I read that was a passion of yours, and it stopped me in my tracks because I look at this whole career trajectory, and I did not anticipate that point where you said, "And my passion." Exactly. Monsters. I just didn't see that coming. So take us to that and what you're working on now.
Exactly. And so that takes me back to my childhood because my older sister and me, we would watch the monster. Back in those days, Saturday mornings was with all the crazy, attack of the lobster, the king crab, and all just the cornier the better because I didn't want to have nightmares. So the cornier, that's why I like The Exorcist and that kind of stuff I didn't like because that was a little too close to real. But the more extreme it was, the more entertaining it was for me. And Trey, that's what went full circle. Because I was reading something and people was like, do what you know. And that's a very powerful statement. It's like, what do I know? I said, I know monsters. That's what I enjoyed. And the biggest one that I saw when I wrote was the Swamp Thing. Because
I remember it.
And I don't remember this part. In the Swamp Thing, out of nowhere, there was this little black kid. There's just like this one little black kid, and I'm like, that's me. I'm like, who wrote this? There was no extra family. They just happened to have this black kid in the Swamp Thing, and I was like, this is why entertainment is just what it. I mean, I didn't know it back then why I was there, but it's like if they're still alive, kudos to that writer and director. because this little black kid from Yaden, Pennsylvania, saw that little black kid in the swamps and realized I had a home in monster movies, and that's where it came full circle, Trey.
And before we let you go, the name of the script, you can go ahead and tell us if you want to, promote it if you want to, whatever you want to do with it, and how you tie in a seasoning to that.
Yeah. So so the name of the monster movie is called Krogaroo, like crawfish Krogaroo. Now it is a play off of, for those of you are from Louisiana, it's a play off of a legendary called Rougarou, which was a half man, half wolf. Well, I wanted to come into that world with a half man, half creature, so a half man, half crawfish.
Amazing.
And then I tapped into my marketing standpoint, because I know nowadays, a lot of companies don't want to spend a lot of money on marketing. So I was like, okay, well, what if I come up with a product that is natural to the movie? Because in the movie, they're eating crawfish and you got to put seasoning on it. So I said, well, I'm going to create a Krogarou monster seasoning, a real seasoning that you can actually use, that you can really sell in the real world, and tap into product before the movie as a way to introduce it. And then as I was doing it, Trey, I didn't realize that outside of America, the number one people who eat crawfish is China.
No, I had no idea.
China. The Japanese introduced crawfish to the Chinese rice fields, and they saw it as an alternative crop to raise and to eat. And I was like, who's this exporter? They're like, Louisiana, and they said China. I said, there we go. I'm going to approach this financing of this horror movie through introducing a real product that you can really use, and then make, when the movie happens, an event, a fun event. So you get your crawfish, get your season going, take your girlfriend to the movies, and just enjoy it, be scared for an hour or two, and then come home. I mean, I wanted to kind of recreate my little Yaden movie theater experience.
There you go.
Everybody. Just
come full circle.
Right. Wind it down, have a little fun, just bring the temperature down. I'm not trying to get deep. I'm not trying to get it. This is just purely to have a fun. That's what I enjoyed about Jordan Peele again when he did his movie, because there was no backstory to it. You had to go, and it was like, it was fun. It was anticipating. It's like, oh my God. And I saw people like, well, let's go to AMC together. I was like, I want to get the theater back to that experience again, where we make it a destination to have some fun and something different.
I love it. And it's quite frankly, it's much needed. And the thing that stands out to me, and you and I talking here, man, you love this. Hey, when we brought up this project just now in that script, you lit up just talking about that whole thing and taking it back to your childhood. It's where we started.
Exactly.
And it's come full circle. And we appreciate you coming on, because, it's our thing here is the story behind the story.
Yes.
I've learned a lot, and I've certainly gotten stories I never have heard or would not have expected. And, you've had, it's going to be a bad play on words, you've had a monster successful career.
Oh, I love that.
And we wish you the best, and we'll be watching. I'm going to look out.
Thank you, Trey.
And I'm going to have to give me some seasoning too.
There you go. Well, I'll make sure I get it to Lori so you can get it to you, because I use it. Lori, I don't know if she pop on, but it's a workable season. This isn't a fake season. My mother puts it on her eggs, and when your mom, she loves you to death, but she'd be like, "Baby, you need to go back and fix it." So my mom uses it. So it's been tested before I finally launched it, because I use it in my own home. And I want to have, there's going to be Krogarou fries out there. We're going to have all kind of fun with it.
I love it.
But just as Andy, I wanted to thank you, because your platform has a different kind of angle for people like me. And I really appreciate that.
Absolutely.
From you. Yeah.
Well, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring people and just tell stories and real life, the story behind the story, not what everybody thinks they know.
Exactly.
But going behind the scenes a little bit. And by the way, you've mentioned Lori a couple of times. For people who don't know, Lori Muslow, who now runs It's All Good Entertainment, who Andre and I happen to know very well, mutual acquaintance. So if you've heard that name through this thread, there's a reason why. I would just leave it at this. She's a dynamo, and we'll just leave it there. Andre, we appreciate you, man. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you too, Trey. Thank you all.
All right. That'll wrap it up for this episode of The Edge of It All. Be sure to listen to us on UBN Go International Network or wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us across all podcast streams as well as social media. Please like, follow, and subscribe. Thanks again to Andre Barnwell for sharing his success story with us. Be sure to support all of the many projects he has out there for you to watch, listen to, go see, any of that. Support Andre Barnwell. We appreciate everybody for listening to The Edge of It All today, the story behind the story. Every other week, there's a new episode with inside scoop you have never heard before. Till next time, everyone.